Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Accessibility Talks, or A11y Talks, the monthly virtual meetup where we chat about digital accessibility, inclusivity, and usability. Each month, we invite a speaker to present on a topic, and afterward, we invite the community to ask questions and participate in the discussion. I'm your host today. My name is Andrew Olson. I also go by Andy Olson. I work at Principal Financial Group, and I use the pronouns he, him. I'm a software engineer at Principal. I am a redheaded male, white male with dark rimmed glasses, and I have my long red hair pulled back. And I'm proudly wearing an accessibility t-shirt and excited to be here today as your host. We have a live transcript, so we're fortunate enough to have a sponsorship where we're able to have live transcripts. So on your screen, there's a QR code, so feel free to take a picture of that and follow along with the live transcript. You can also get it at this URL, which is bit.ly, so bit.ly/A11yTalks-live-transcript. We also want to take a moment to remind everybody about our code of conduct. Remind everybody that our group seeks to provide a friendly and safe environment, and we require all participants to adhere to the Accessibility Talks Code of Conduct. This includes speakers, hosts like myself, and those watching on YouTube, and folks commenting in social networks. This applies to every interaction for all of our events, verbal questions, and all chat and text channels. This Code of Conduct is on your screen at this URL, which is A11yTalks, that's A11yTalks.com/conduct. All participants should be able to engage in productive dialogue and should share and learn with each other in an atmosphere of mutual respect. If you have any questions for our speaker, we love questions. We have a very exciting topic today. And at the end, we'll take that Q&A and we will ask Lisa questions. If you have a question, you can send it to us in multiple ways. During our live talk, you type the question in the YouTube chat window. It can be kind of busy in the chat, so please start any questions with a Q or the word question and go ahead and ask there. You can also post a question to any of our social media accounts. And when you do that, you can add the hashtag of A11yTalks. That's A11yTalks. And what we'll do is, even afterward, if you watch the video and have questions, feel free to post that. And what we'll do is talk to our speaker and get you a response to that question. We can't do this without our sponsors. So we're really excited to have the Agile Collective as a bronze sponsor for A11yTalks, and we really appreciate your support. We also can't do this without our wonderful AlleyCat Club members. On the screen, you will see a list of all the names. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm loving to see that this list grows and grows. If you have any questions about how to contribute, you can sponsor us. So either through the AlleyCat Club or talk to your company about sponsorship. We'd love to talk to you. And as I said, we can't do this without some sponsorship dollars. We are a volunteer organization. We're a nonprofit, and we appreciate everything so we can bring these wonderful conversations to you. That's AlleyTalks.com/sponsorship to learn more. One more way to contribute. We are on Benevity. So if your company has a donation matching, I know my company, Principal Financial, is on Benevity. You can find us and possibly your company can do a donation match. And when you search for us, it's again, A11yTalks, A11yTalks. You should get that by now, A11yTalks. And it'll say A11yTalks by Midwest Open Source Alliance. Now, through all of that, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today. So we have Lisa Noble. She is a director/distinguished UX UI engineer and designer at Discover Financial Services. And we always ask our speaker for a fun fact, and I'm excited about this one, is her name is the Norwegian spelling of Lisa. And I am also of Norwegian heritage. And so my grandfather would say two things to us often. Oof, duh. So is that still a statement? He came over from Norway, so I'm familiar with the term UFTA. Is that still
It is, yeah, oofda, yeah, absolutely.
excellent? Um, well, with that, Lisa is going to present on the A11Y Theme Builder. It's the first ever open source project for Discover Financial Service. As an open source person, I'm really excited about this, and also as somebody that works in the financial industry. So with that, I want to hand this over to Lisa. Take it away, Lisa.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andy. And thank you guys for inviting me here today. I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about the A11Y Theme Builder, Ally Theme Builder. As you mentioned, it is Discover's first ever open source project, and we're so happy that it is about accessibility. As you mentioned, my name is a Norwegian spelling. Lots of times people think I actually misspell on my own slides. It is an Lise. That is Norwegian spelling and perhaps the root of my dyslexia. I'm not really sure. But as he mentioned, I work at Discover Financial Services and both have the role of a distinguished UX UI engineer and as a director. So when I first came to Discover, seeing that I was, both UX and UI, it was very, just intuitive for me to sort of look at our design to development process and how we created user experiences. And so I applied design thinking to sort of explore that process. And along the way, I identified a lot of pain points. Now, there were a lot of pain points for the designers, for the developers, for the POs, and certainly for the end user who was consuming the experiences. And the one thing that I did is I really dug into the pain points to find out sort of what were the pain points rooted in, or what were the root causes of those pain points. And it seemed that many of the pain points were rooted in misconceptions. The process also revealed a great deal of inefficiencies in our process. And then before solutioning, we wanted to highlight the complexities not only that we were facing as a company in building digital experiences that were inclusive, but universal sort of complexities that every company was being challenged with. And certainly the pain points that I identified were not specific to Discover. It seemed very much universal. And it seemed like companies were perpetuating these problems over and over again. So let's explore some of those misconceptions. So, first of all, there's a misconception that global accessibility is improving year to year. And although there have been incredible leaps and bounds made in global accessibility, I mean, we have lawsuits, we have guidelines with WCAG, there's a lot of tools out there, there's a lot of startups around accessibility. But there's a misconception that because there are all these efforts, that clearly our interfaces must be getting better, and they're just not. I actually was trying to find a graph that went back to 1999, which is when WCAG was initiated, and I couldn't quite find one. But this one does demonstrate sort of my point, right? That there's not like a continual improvement on accessibility. We're sort of just hovering around the same spot. In some years, we actually are getting worse. And part of that is because interfaces are becoming more and more complex. Here it shows the number of components that we have on a experience. So pages are becoming more complicated. So that is one of the reasons for the accessibility not improving. And a lot of people think, well, my company's small, or I have a mom and pop shop, and I don't really need to worry about accessibility. And there was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the number of mom and pop firms getting hit by lawsuits. And it really just points out that, everybody needs to be concerned about accessibility. If you're online and you have an experience, or you're sharing your stories online, it needs to be accessible by everyone. You have to follow the same WCAG guidelines as do giant corporations. Now, I work at a financial corporation, and financial corporations are actually held at even higher standard because, of course, people are accessing their money, and they need to be understand and be able to take action on those resources. Another misconception is that only customer-facing experiences need to be accessible. Now, this is absolutely not true. As a company, you're required for your internal communications and digital communications to be accessible. So that includes, your internal websites, but also your emails and your PowerPoints. Anything that you use to communicate should be fully accessible and meet all the requirements. And then another misconception is that your tool chain. So I often hear this from engineers that like, oh, we're covered. I use Storybook, to assess our components. But the one thing you should know about Storybook in particular, as well as a lot of the other tools that developers use to assess their accessibility, is that it looks at your components and your interface in isolation, which means it's not testing to see if your component against your chosen background actually meets the requirements for accessibility. Um, and then here's a very common misconception, and I actually have heard this not too recently, but when I bring up accessibility within my org, people say, yeah, but how many people actually, how many of our customers actually have accessibility needs? And of course, 1 in 6 people in the world have accessibility issues. And a WebAIM survey found that 20% of all web traffic came from people with disabilities. And we also should keep in mind that people who have disabilities are nearly twice as likely or twice as often online using online services and shopping online than people without disabilities. Other thing I want to make a point of here is I'm sure you guys all know this, but when you improve accessibility, you're improving the experience for everyone. So, you're making contrast better, you're making things more consistent, you're giving more space. And those are improving the experiences for everyone, not only people with accessibility issues. The other thing that I want to point out is, it is a smart thing to invest in accessibility. Forrester research says that for every dollar you invest in accessibility, you get $100 back. And also, people with disabilities account for $1 trillion of disposable income worldwide every year. But that influence grows to about $8 trillion when you realize that people who have accessibility issues, their friends and their families prefer to do businesses with companies that accommodate for those accessibility needs. And here's a huge misconception. Someone else on my team has accessibility covered. Now, this was one of the major reasons that we had so many problems in our end-to-end development lifecycle of user experiences. Designers assumed engineers had it, engineers assumed designers had it, and everyone was sort of pointing the finger to someone else. And it really is everyone on your team's responsibility to create accessibility. And you need to really streamline that process in order to make sure that you hit the mark. Another misconception is, well, if I just use my default browser settings or I use a JS library, I'm covered. Now, this simply is not true. A lot of those JS libraries do not take accessibility into account, and certainly your browser does not, right? If you design an interface using the default settings of your browser for things like focus states and hot links, it works only if you don't use a background color, right? You use the default background color of white and a black or near black in a dark mode. But the moment you introduce color to your interface, everything sort of falls apart. All right, now let's talk about some of the efficiencies that we observed. Accessibility testing is often done at the end of a design to development lifecycle. That is extremely inefficient because then you have to go all the way back to the beginning to address the issues in the design area in order to fix the problems. And the other problem here is that design issues that are flagged at the end of the lifecycle often go into your Git repo as an upgrade or a cosmetic change that never needs to happen, and then it never comes to the front of the work log. And design systems are often just created for light mode alone, right? Components are designed and designed on a singular background color. Now, as I mentioned, this is where a lot of design systems fall apart. They create buttons and components in one color, then they move those components to gray or black to other colors, and then everything falls apart. And here's an example of this. Now, these two slides that or screenshots that I grabbed from Dribble have accessibilities of themselves on just this one color. But as you can see, they're not considering other colors. And so these components get used throughout a user experience, and then things fall apart. Teams often have different systems for different platforms. So, a lot of companies have one design system for iOS, another for Android, another for desktop, and it creates a lot more work than we need to be creating. And most design systems are created for WCAG AA, but there are companies out there that will require AAA, particularly if you're working in the governmental sector. So if you as a company are approached to work for or provide your services for a company that has WCAG AAA requirements, you're probably starting from scratch with your design system, which will be an extremely arduous process. And reaching that AAA requirement is extremely hard. Now, every company in the world is creating a design system, right? And everyone's doing it in isolation. And yet there's nothing proprietary about your button or your drop-down menu. And so we're all doing it in isolation. And so it's rather ineffective. So some of the complexities. So WCAG guidelines are complicated, right? They really are hard to pick apart. They're hard to understand. And there are people who have different perspectives on the guidelines themselves. And training designers and developers on WCAG guideline takes a lot of organization, a lot of time, and a lot of money. And putting the responsibility on the shoulders of your designers or your developers is less than ideal because they're usually already completely overwhelmed and overloaded. And you can rely on third-party testing, but this is extremely expensive and it's perpetual, meaning like if you do the testing on your website as is and you spend all that money, well then when you improve your user interface or you introduce a new style guide, you really sort of have to start all over, and that can be very expensive. And building a design system is increasingly complex. And that's because we're designing for light mode, dark mode, we're designing for desktop, mobile, wearables. And it's becoming more and more complicated to figure out how to build a design system effectively. And AI is also a complicated factor that complicates designs. And it's because AI, of course, is based on historic designs and code. And historically, our designs and our code are not very accessible. So AI is often perpetuating problems in designs. So what if rather than working on our silos, we could solve accessibility together, and instead of working, individually, we worked collectively and collaboratively to address this issue? And what if we took a different approach to accessibility? What if we thought we could build it? What if we could build it into the logic of our design systems, addressing it in the beginning rather than at the end? And what if we could front load that logic and make it dynamic so that the interface could dynamically change based on inputs from the user's device, from their specific needs, from the background colors, from things like elevation, and make sure that your experience maintains accessibility? And what if we could perpetuate that logic in the AI generated code and designs that come out of your design system? And what if, rather than just struggling to meet the minimum standards, we reimagined what it was to create an accessible experience? What I mean by that is, right now, we're all just running around and plugging holes of accessibility problems. But yet, there's so much more that accessibility can do to help people who have accessibility needs. For example, people who have ADHD, they do better when there's more white space, when there's more contrast. When people who have dyslexia are reading content, it makes sense for them to have more line height and for there be particular fonts that can be used. Sans serif fonts are both better for people with ADHD and for people with dyslexia. And there's actually dyslexic fonts that are out there that we could be using for people with dyslexia. And there's a lot of other things out there that we can do too. People who have motion sensitivity, we can reduce the amount of animation on a screen. We can get rid of micro animations. And all of that is just, we can make that all doable just by swapping out a couple of tokens. But because we're all so busy trying to meet the minimum, no one's really stepping back and examining what we should be doing and could be doing to really improve the experience for people with accessibility needs. So with that said, I want to introduce you guys to Theme Builder. So the idea with Theme Builder was that we would take an out-of-the-box design system in React and Figma, and we would take your brand guidelines. So we would take things like, what is your grid system? Are you using 8-point or a 10-point grid system? What are your corporate colors? What are your corporate fonts? What do you want? How do you want to bevel your buttons? And we'll take all this information and we will put it into our theme builder open source project, spit out some code, and use that to transform the out of the box component library that exists in Figma and the React component library, and then create a branded WCAG accessible compliant design system that meets all of the requirements from WCAG and represents your brand guidelines in both Figma and in code. And that just by doing that alone, we are able to create so much more speed. Just creating those artifacts on your own would take a really long time. But now with just a couple of clicks of a button, we're able to create those two unified complementary components. But also we allow then you to create not only light mode, but dark mode. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So how did we do that? The approach that we took was we looked at what is the best way to build a design system. So we took a play from Brad Frost to build design systems atomically. Now, again, this isn't something that we created. This has been around for a while. And the idea with Brad Frost was that he combined the ideas of molecular theory to create design systems. And what he did is he took the smallest building blocks of a design system, and he called those atoms. And those are things like colors and fonts and grid systems, as I mentioned. And then you pull those things together to create molecules. An example of a molecule would be a button, right? It's using your corporate color, it's using your corporate font, it's applying some bevel, and it is coming up with a design component. And then you can pull those molecules together, molecules and atoms, to create organisms. An example of an organism would be a card. We all know that those are used everywhere in their face. And those are using both titles, it's using images, it's using buttons, it's using all of different molecules together to create an organism. And then you put those organisms to create templates and those templates to create experiences. Now, the only problem with this is it does not account for accessibility. You could take atoms together and create a molecule that is completely not accessible in terms of the color to the background and the font on top of that color. And so this didn't quite work for our model. And we sort of thought we could take this and then expand upon it. And what we did is we decided we needed to go subatomic. So we introduced the idea of protons, neutrons, and electrons to this model. And so for every color that we introduce to our design system, every color that you say, oh, this is a corporate color, what we do is we create 10 shades of that color in both light mode and dark mode. And then we will make sure that we have an on color that meets the WCAG requirement of 4.5 to 1. And that is what's required for small fonts. So now any font on top of that will meet the requirement of WCAG AA. Now we did, that sounds really easy, but I'm sure you guys don't know, but every color in the, out there is not accessible with either white or black text on it, right? So there are colors out there. If you just did this automatically on your own, you would find colors in the middle shades that don't meet accessibility guidelines if you are not putting the math and the science behind it. So what we do is we take that complexity away. But then also when we start putting our atoms together to create molecules, we're looking at the AA and AAA requirements to make sure that we pair them together appropriately so that when we take your color and we put it on top of a background, it meets that 3.1 to 1 contrast for things like buttons and clickable components. And then when you create your organisms and templates, they are by default accessible. And then again, as we said, we allow you to turn on switches or turn switches on and off in the design system to make it more accessible for light mode, dark mode, AA, AAA, and adapt to desktop, mobile, and tablet. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of demo of our V1 theme builder. And we're actually working on a V2 version, and I'm going to introduce you guys to that as well and talk about some of the things we learned from V1 and the things that we're going to be implementing from V2. So I'm going to give you guys a little demo here. So I'm going to jump over to my browser and show you guys around. So first of all, I want you guys to know that this is our GitHub resource. We have all sorts of documentation here. You can learn how to get involved. I do have a QR code linked to this for you guys later in the presentation, but we do, of course, have a Git repo, and we would love people to get involved. So next, I want to show you guys that this is our theme builder, right? This is a live instance of it. And we actually wanted to create an instance of it that people could play around with, because we didn't want there to be a barrier for designers to get involved with this open source project. And designers are not necessarily comfortable with GitHub and cloning and, doing all the things that's required to get an instance of an app running locally. So we have this online instance, and again, I have a QR code that I will share with you guys later. But we wanted designers to be able to help us with this. Now, again, this user experience needs some help. This was really just our proof of concept to put it out there to see if we could achieve the goal of seeing if we could front end a design system with logic. And we were successful in doing that. And I just want to show you guys a little bit about this. So first thing I need to do is name my design system. And the next thing that I need to do is start adding colors to my design system. So I'm going to add a purple color. So I'll go over here. And as I mentioned, the first thing that you're going to see is that we create 10 shades of these colors in light mode and dark mode. You can turn on the details to see information about the color, the on color, and the contrast. And as you guys will see, all the colors have a contrast of 4.1 or higher. And in dark mode, getting this contrast to work is much harder than in light mode. And the reason is that white is no longer pure white. It's white with an opacity of between 0.6 and 0.7. And so it's harder to get that contrast, but again, we do all of the math for you. So I'm going to add a few more colors to my color palette here. I'm going to add a blue. And again, you're going to see it's going to do that. And then I'm going to add a pink color. I guess this one's looking rather Barbie, but it's okay. So I'm going to add that. And again, you see all of the colors are there. So that lays the foundation of my theme or of my design system. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. So I'm going to have my primary color be a purple. I'm going to have my secondary color be a pink, and I'm going to have my tertiary color be a green color. And then I'm going to pick what my background color is going to be in light mode. And you can pick a white, a black. You can pick a really pale version of your primary color or a really dark version. We're trying to not limit designers in terms of the interface that they want to create, but we won't need these basic information so that we can start, making sure that your components sit on top of those colors, those primary colors and default colors with meeting those requirements. So I'm going to say what I want my dark mode color to be. And then we also decided to introduce the idea that you can have gradients in your design system. Design systems often fall apart because of gradients, because you need all the colors in your gradients to have the same on color in order for the text on top of it to remain accessible. So when you pick a color, we then only allow you to pick other colors that have the same on color. So you can go across into different shades. So I could go from purple to pink, but you can only pick colors, again, that have the same on color. If I want to pick a darker one, I will be limited to colors that have the same dark on color. And then I'm going to pick my branded button color. It's going to be purple. I can pick a gradient text if I want. Oh, that's the icon color. Sorry, a gradient text. Again, a place where design systems fall apart. And then I can pick an accent color, which doesn't need to be accessible. And once I do that, you will see that it creates these components or the light and dark mode for me. And then you can go in and specify all sorts of other things. Like I said before, you can specify your font, your heading, your body styles. You can play around with shadow settings. This is actually a fun area to play around with, because in light mode, elevation is often showed with drop shadows. And then in light mode, it's shown with increasing lightness. So we show you what those look like. You can play around with, the extremes of how you want your drop shadows to look. You can play around with that. We also have bevel settings. We all know that bevels sort of went out of style, I think, in the 80s. But again, we didn't want to limit our designers. So we have bevels, and they reproduce all these different looks out of those settings. Then there are other atomic settings that, like your grid system. Now you'll see if I change my grid system from 8 to 6, you see things start to change in real time. We wanted the user interface to reflect the design system that you guys are building. And then once you put it all together, you can sort of fine tool your molecules. So you can look at, how you want to apply those styles to your buttons, all of your other components. You can change the way things look. And then you can look at more advanced components and how they come together. You can look at organisms, which are the more complicated components. And then you can look at the template. Now here we have sort of a mock-up of what your design system would look like with the settings that you provided, and you can toggle between light and dark mode instantly to see how those are going to look. So that was our proof of concept for V1. And what I want to show you guys is a little bit of more what we've done along the lines of V2. So at this point, I'm going to jump into Figma. And again, what we do have is we have this Figma file out there for you guys. I will share the QR code at the end of the presentation for you. And I will walk you guys through some of the things that we're doing with the V2 code. Now, the one thing I do want to communicate is that in our V1, what we did is we exported code. Actually, I should show you guys that. We exported code that gets generated by Theme Builder in CSS and in JSON. And what we decided was we were going to simplify what we export, and we were just going to export JSON. And the reason is we want one source of truth. And with transformers, you can transform that JSON code into CSS, but you can also use it to create logic or code for Xcode and Android. So now we only have one source of truth that needs to be manipulated. It can actually be exported to create multiple interfaces, not just CSS. So that's really one of the major shifts in our thinking. So let me just go from here. All right, so as I mentioned, we switched the logic for from our V1 to our V2. Also in V1, we only allowed you to have one theme. And we decided in V2 that you were going to have one giant design system, but you could have multiple themes. And we saw that need within our own company. For example, we have internal websites that are designed for engineers, and then we have other internal websites that are more marketing. And when you're creating user interfaces for engineer, they want more content density. They can have things more packed in, but when you're creating marketing material, you want more white space. So we also found that different parts of the company wanted to use slightly different colors. For example, our HR department uses slightly different colors than like our engineering department. So they wanted to be able to have those subtle differences. So now you can have different themes within one design system. They use the same chord logic, but you can swap out things like colors and line heights and things like that. In V1, we only had a AA light mode and dark mode. I will be showing you later that we now have introduced AAA light mode and dark mode. We also hadn't really taken into account elevations, and that is where we continue to see things fall apart. And when I mean elevations, as I said before, in light mode, elevations are showed with drop shadow. In dark mode, the backgrounds become increasingly light. But the problem was that buttons that were accessible and hot links that were accessible at elevation 1 were no longer accessible at elevation 5. So we've taken that into account. We also changed our color scales. So we were doing linear color scales in terms of their chroma and their light and the darkness. And after doing a lot of color studies, we've triangulated our chroma, which makes a much richer color scale. So when your colors are created, your chroma actually creates an arch. The colors should get more saturated and more saturated up until around the 500 or 600 shades, and then they should drop down again. We also limited you originally to just one icon color, but we realized, of course, there's a need to have different icon colors. So we allow you to have sort of endless icon colors that can speak to both, critical, like, errors or warnings or successes, but you can also add different colors. Again, we allow you to create an unlimited number of gradients moving forwards. And we cleaned up our Figma file. We found out that many people's Figma files are getting a little out of control, and what we did is for each component now, we really have just one component, but we have different small component add-ons that you can switch out in that component, medium and large component add-ons. So now when you have a card component, you don't have to have like 100 different varieties where some have an image and some do not, and some have icons and some have avatars. You now just switch out the components in there, and it makes it much more flexible. So I will jump in and show you guys that quickly. All right, so here is our Figma file, and this is the code that you guys, this is the file that you guys will see out of the box. We use a plugin called Token Studio, which we use to import the logic from our theme builder into Figma. And what you get as a result are all of these variables in here. So you can see the modes, we have backgrounds, we have cognitive modes, and this is, again, as I mentioned before, we have dyslexia and ADHD for now. What that does is it swaps out fonts, it changes line heights, character spacing, all sorts of things that make it more consumable for people with those disabilities. We have colorblind modes, so we have 8 different colorblind modes that you can apply. And just to clarify what that does is it does not change your branded design, but it changes the infographics so that anybody who is looking at a graph or a warning light understands and can differentiate between the different colors. I'll show you guys a little bit of that more. We also have the user interfaces change based on the device. So again, I'll show you that. The layouts change. We also have platforms. So we have iOS and Android and iOS mobile and tablet. The target areas change between those. The headers change between those. The fonts change between those. So now you guys don't need to manage 3 different design systems. It all can be managed with one design system that just turns on and off these tokens. We also have gradients, we have elevations. So again, we are taking account for elevations. So things like colors and drop shadows and on colors will change based on elevation to keep things compliant. But I will walk you guys through this really quickly. As you can see, we have all the standard components here for you guys to look through, and they all update and change based on the inputs. So this is essentially how it works. So for target area, first of all, what I have to do is change this to not dyslexic, but regular. All right, so the way we work with target areas is the target areas can change, right? They change based on the platform, they change based on cognitive disabilities. For those, we increase the target area to 48. They change from desktop, which has a minimum of 24, to tablets and mobile devices, which should be 44 for Apple and 48 for Android. So the way we handle that is we put a parent container around every clickable component that you have in your library. And then you don't have to necessarily have the visual elements look like they're 44 pixels, because it kind of gets a little strange if everything is that big. But we make sure that the components themselves have that target area. So now if I change this input right now from Android to iOS, you'll see that the target area went from 48 to 44. If I put it on my default desktop settings, I have mine set for 32. So you can see that the target areas are changing. And that's how we maintain the target areas for your components based on how you're changing things. As I mentioned before, if I put it in dyslexic mode, it's going to jump up to 48. So all of these different components, all of these different inputs are going to affect your components. The other thing that I want to show here is that your designers and your developers no longer need to understand, well, what button color should it be when it's on green, or when it's on blue, or when it's on these different shades. When you are a designer creating interfaces and you drag a component onto a design, it automatically updates based on the background color. So we are doing all of the logic here in our Figma file and in our code, and I'll show you guys that a little bit. So your designers and your developers no longer need to think about it. It's built into the design system, and the dynamic nature of the way we designed our tokens to communicate and update based on the inputs will take care of maintaining accessibility. Same with hot links. And hot links are tricky because there's a multitude of things that you need to take into account. It's not only that the color needs to maintain a contrast of 4.5 to the background, but it also needs to maintain a contrast to the surrounding colors, or it needs to be underlined. So again, we make sure that this changes and adapts based on your background and light mode and dark mode. We also take care of focus states. Now, the way we've handled this is we have the focus state be the same color as your as your button color. And that is because doing the calculations to make sure that your button stayed compliant as well as the focus stayed compliant got rather tricky. And the blue focus state that you guys often see out of the box that works on your default background won't work and provide an accessible experience for people unless your background is the default background. So if we move this button, for example, to the dark blue, a blue focus state no longer is accessible. It doesn't indicate focus and meet the requirements of 3.1 to 1 to the background. So this is how we're handling the focus state. Additionally, things that fall apart in design systems is people have quiet text, right? Quiet text is a little bit more opaque or a little not as bright as the standard code. But again, these quiet text often are no longer accessible when you go into dark mode or if you put it on different color backgrounds. So we make sure that your quiet text is always accessible. The other thing I mentioned before are elevations. If I swap my mode now from dark mode, you'll see that it instantly updates the cards that were both that were showing their elevation from 1 to 5 that had a drop shadow in light mode is now using the increasing lightness in dark mode. And again, any button or any text or any quiet text on top of here is going to maintain accessibility. The other thing that we did is we have an adaptive nav, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit of this. I think I have a better way of demonstrating this, but our navigation can change from desktop to mobile in Figma as well as in our code. And again, your designers don't need to worry about designing for that. It automatically happens. And here's an example of the colorblind mode. So if I change my colorblind mode from red week to green week to blue week, all the colors are going to adapt so that people with those colorblind disabilities can differentiate between the colors. So that is something that we think is really important. We're trying to think of all the different types of accessibility issues that people have, and that clearly was one of them. And then in dark mode, we automatically make sure that things like images are no longer pure white, as in white light mode they are, but we weren't able to sort of replicate that in Figma before. So now you can see that the images are no longer pure white. They've actually been darkened. And so that makes it more accessible. So one of the things I can show you guys really quickly is sort of how this all comes together. I've created a really quick demo here for you. And you can see that I have made a mock-up, and all I have to do to change these components is change some of these inputs. So if I go from my device is a mobile, I'm going to go to tablet. In one click, I can see that everything is changing around and updating based on that. I can go from light mode to dark mode. It's doing all of the logic to maintain accessibility. I can go from Android to Apple. It's doing some really subtle changes here. It's changing the look of the status bar to be consistent with the platform. It's changing all the fonts. It's changing the target areas. And I can change from my theme. I have a default theme here. I'm going to change it from that to my Maxos theme. The things that it's happening here, it's changing my icons or my logos. It's changing my background colors. It's changing my fonts. I can go from that to another one. It's changing some of the other things that it would take a lot more time for me to do if I had to maintain these in 3 or 4 different modes, right? So now I can go from AA to AAA light mode 2. So these are all the things that I can do to my interface that are updating the tokens in the background to keep things compliant. The other thing that we thought was missing in the end-to-end design process that made experiences fall apart is designers are looking at these experiences in Figma and then handing them off to development. And designers can actually go in and, users can go in and they can zoom in on an experience twice the size, right? You can zoom in, but designers aren't experiencing that. So one of the things that we've done is that you can change your zoom to 2-fold and you can see what happens to your user interface when it's twice the size. Like, do navigation still work? Was something fixed in size and now the text isn't wrapping? So we're trying to think of all the things that, we need to think about from design to development to make sure that your user interface updates appropriately. So that's the V2. The other thing that I want to show you guys is I had mentioned about using AI, and there is a really cool plugin in Figma called Anima. And what you can do is you can highlight a component and it will automatically render the React components. And it's using all of the components that I already have created in my Figma. So it has an avatar, it has a button, it has some list styles. And now it's telling me this is the logic I should use to create my new component. And if you look at the styles, you will see that it is using my my tokens. So now it can perpetuate the logic that is being used, consuming my 2 tokens in the suggested code that comes out of Anima. I can also show you that in code, what I was saying, the same thing that I said could happen in code happens, in Figma, happens for our developers. So let's say I want to go from light mode to dark mode. As a developer, I don't need to go in and change all my code and figure out what I need to do to keep this compliant. It simply does it by changing these data themes. If I go from my Maxos theme to my default theme, it'll go from that to orange. And I'm trying to see, there's one thing. I can go from my no cognitive mode to my dyslexic mode. And it's going to implement, that dyslexic font, increase the target area, increase the line height, increase the line spacing. So all of the token logic that existed in my Figma is being perpetuated in my code, and we're trying to take the burden away from both the designers and the developers.
Lisa,
yeah,
this is amazing. We're running close on time and we have a lot of good questions. So I wanted to give you a chance to wrap up.
Awesome. Yep. I'm just about to wrap up. So as I promised you guys, I have a couple of slides here that I'll share so that people can just grab some URLs. As we mentioned, we're not trying to just create accessible design, but inclusive design, going above and beyond what people are already doing with interfaces to take in people who have cognitive needs as well as colorblind needs. So here are some important resources. We have the Git repo here. We also have the online instance available for people who don't necessarily want to clone a repo on their local device, on their local system. And then finally, we have our Figma file that you guys can go in and play around with. And that's it. So now we can open it up to questions.
Can you go back to your resources and full screen that? So
yeah, of course.
Yeah. That would
There we
be
go.
great. We'll pause on there and gather some questions. This is really good. I was not familiar with that anima.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I have a link to that. Hopefully that'll go in the chat. I
yeah,
think there's some activity in the chat. Um,
yeah.
was
Anima's
there
amazing.
another one? Maybe go to the slide before that if there was other
Oh,
resources. I was
this one,
looking down.
the
Yeah,
fig wow.
we'll just hold on this for a little bit. But
Sure.
again, this was really great. Super excited. And again, I hated to interrupt, but we do have some good questions and then need to
Yeah,
wrap up.
no, absolutely.
With that, yeah, I think Marky is going to be putting some questions up here. So I'll read that for the audience. So on the screen, we have a question that says, you mentioned fonts for dyslexic folks. Where can I find them, or do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I'm using one called Open Dyslexic. If you Google that, you'll find that. It's free. So I know the person who designed it is dyslexic and it's based on science. There's a couple of other ones out there as well, but that's the one that I zeroed in on. And the reason I became aware of that is my son is also dyslexic like me. And he has a Kindle, and he was like, "Mom, it's so much easier for me to read on my Kindle because I can put it in dyslexic mode." And it uses that dyslexic font and it puts it in dark mode, increases line height. And that was what really got me thinking, like, oh my God, there's so much that we could be doing that we're not doing. So
Wow,
that's sort of how I came upon that.
that's an amazing recommendation. That's helping real folks. So thanks so much. I was not aware of that. Uh,
Yeah.
let's move on to the next question, Lisa. Do you have any plans to build this design system using other JS libraries besides React?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all we need is bodies and people and enthusiasm. This is an open source project, so absolutely. If people are interested and want to get involved, there's really no limit as to where this could go. We actually have ideas that maybe this could be used not only for in JavaScript libraries, but could we export this logics to keep your PowerPoints, accessible? So I think we're only limited by our own creativity. So there's no reason that we can't go into other libraries and create other experiences and perpetuate this. And so, yes, that's the hope.
Wonderful. We'll go to the next question. Does the Alley theme builder allow you to customize folder names like atoms, buttons, and links?
So right now it doesn't, right? So right now we don't have that capability, but we're looking at it. There's that capability within Figma itself where you can using Code Connect, you can like in Figma, you can have it named one thing, and then in your code, you can have it named something else. So we're looking into that. Again, there's no reason I think technology wise we can't get there. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Great. That's okay. That's why there's more versions.
Yeah, right, right.
Another question. What tools do you use to create the different variations of color? This was my questions. I asked it before you actually got into the tool and
Yeah,
generated it.
yeah.
So that's maybe a library, or I'll let you talk.
Yeah, it's actually my own coded library. Like I did a lot of study with color. So the logic that's working there is really homegrown by me, but I'm using WCAG's the calculations from WCAG to create the contrast and things like that. But I did a lot of studying on colors and sort of how I could more elegantly make the transition of color. 'Cause it's really complicated, to be honest, but basically what I did is I started out with when you put in a color, I evaluate what the brightness of that color is between 0 and 100, and based on whatever wherever it came back, like if it had zero point 0.6 brightness, then that was your 600 color, and then I would calculate how many colors I needed to make lighter and how many colors I needed to make darker, and I would do that. But then I would see if they met the on color requirement of 4.5 to 1 with either white or black text. And if they didn't, I had to, slowly just crank up, like make it a little lighter, make it a little darker. And then I would sort of ease the transitions between the colors so that there weren't awkward jumps. When you look at the dark mode colors, or if you look at AAA colors that are generated, there's always a jump between the last color that has a dark test and the first color that has light text. And we try to minimize that. We actually go in and we calculate those colors to be as close as possible, but you'll still see a little bit of a jump there. But yeah, there's a lot of math that goes on behind there.
I was just going to say math is amazing,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And that I'm fascinated by that. That was really cool when I saw you do that.
Yeah, it
I
was so
figured
much
it's
math.
complex.
But it's because the reason we decided it was worth it is like, as designers to try and do that on your own, just trying to
Yes.
figure it out, it takes forever, right? It's really complicated. So we were trying to simplify the process for everyone.
It's wonderful. I know I'm going to kind of call it here. We have a lot more questions and a few even in the comments. I'm going to talk to the team. What we'll do is probably capture those questions
Sure.
and send those to you. And then we'll
Okay.
find the right social way to share those. And then
Okay.
you have an opportunity in response to that. Just because we ran out of time, there was just a lot that you had here and it was
Yeah.
really great. We only have an hour. So
Yeah, exactly.
fortunately,
I know. I can drone on about this stuff for a long time, and I'm happy to go offline and answer questions. But again, I encourage everyone to join the open source project if you're interested. We are looking for engineers as well as designers, UX designers. We're looking for, people who are accessibility experts, people who have accessibility needs, who can maybe highlight other things that we could be doing that we're not yet doing. So,
What
um,
what is a good way to connect? Is it just on that project on GitHub, or do you have
yeah,
like meetings,
we
or
do.
like how do you gather?
Yeah, this is actually a project that has been taken over by Finos. So I don't know if people are familiar with Finos, but it's a financial open source network, and it's owned by the Linux Foundation. The reason that we handed it off from Discover to Finos is because this was Discover's first ever open source project. We weren't able to run it the way a real open source project could be. People could clone it, but they couldn't contribute back to it. So
Mhm.
Finos has taken it over and they're running it. And they meet once a week. If you guys are interested, you can reach out to me, but there's also, if you Google Finos and Ally Theme Builder, you'll see that there's a link there that has our calendar of events and how to sign up. And again, we're looking for people to help move this effort forward. There's a huge amount of work left to do, and it can go in so many great directions, but we think it's all very it's important work because accessibility is not improving across our products and things are becoming more complicated. So we want to give everyone the digital experiences to be the best version of themselves. So yeah, so
Thanks
we'd
so
love
much. What
people.
we're going to do too is we're going to wrap up with that'll be a part of the questions too. So if you can share like what's the best way, like some of the
Sure.
expectations and where to gather and meet to
Okay.
increase Finos and this initiative, that would be amazing. So
Amazing. I'd love to do that.
thanks so much. With that, we're going to just kind of go through our last few slides here. And so as you see on the screen, we have more accessibility talks. We have great conversations like this every month. And we're excited in the new year on January 21st at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We have Ashutosh Kulkarni is going to be talking about Suckometer, a new way of measuring accessibility. And Suck stands for Suboptimal Usability and Comprehension Score. So looking forward to that and in January. We are always looking for speakers. So as you see on the screen, you go to A11yTalks/speakers and connect with us. We'll send some expectations and we're excited to hear what the community has and send that on to friends as well. So as we're looking for speakers, we also, Ally Talks speakers and attendees can receive IAAP certifications. And so that's for your professional development credits, the CAECs, and that goes through the IAAP certification. And so know that that is also possible. If you're interested, you can also reach out on our website to team@allytalks.com. And if you have ideas of how to make this more inclusive or just ways to improve this, we're always open to that. So please let us know if you have ideas. And finally, what we have here on the screen is ways to follow us. We have our YouTube channel, which is live. And then right after this, the video is available to share with your friends and rewatch. We also have a LinkedIn page, so you can connect with us on LinkedIn. We are also now on Blue Sky, so at A11yTalks, and Mastodon as well. Many different ways to get to A11yTalks, and we're looking forward to connecting with you and taking this conversation further. So appreciate your time today. Really want to thank Lisa again for her time, and we will see you in the new year. Thanks so much. Have a great day.